The wind that swept down Massachusetts Avenue was never just wind. In late October, it was a physical force, a biting reminder that winter in Cambridge was less of a season and more of a siege. It rattled the skeletal branches of the oaks lining the Charles River and whipped around the limestone corners of the MIT buildings, carrying with it the scent of wet asphalt, decaying leaves, and the metallic tang of the future. Jason Thorne stepped out of the Ray and Maria Stata Center, shielding his eyes not from the sun, which was buried behind a slate-gray quilt of clouds, but from the sheer brightness of his own prospects. At 22, Jason didn't walk. He computed coordinates and executed movement. He was tall, dressed in a minimalist charcoal coat that cost more than most people's first cars, and possessed the kind of sharp, angular handsomeness that seemed designed by a vector graphics engine. To his left was Mark, a nervous wizard of back-end architecture who treated Jason like a minor deity. To his right was Sarah, a UI/UX specialist who viewed the world in hex color codes. They were the triumvirate of the graduating class, the golden kernels, poised to inherit the tech world before the ink on their diplomas was dry. The beta testing metrics are insane, Mark said, struggling to keep pace with Jason's long strides. We're looking at a latency of under 12 milliseconds on the financial query protocols. Do you realize what that means? The university's old system was clocking in at 3 seconds. Jason checked his smartwatch, dismissing a dozen notifications with a flick of his wrist. 3 seconds is eternity, Mark. 3 seconds is the difference between a high-frequency trade making $1 million or losing it. We aren't just patching a hole. We're performing a heart transplant on a runner while he's sprinting. The Chimera update goes live in 72 hours. I want zero latency. Zero. Professor Stevens is worried about the legacy integration, Sarah chimed in, clutching her tablet to her chest. He keeps talking about the ghosts in the machine, the old 1970s mainframe data structures. He thinks we're moving too fast. Jason stopped abruptly in the middle of the sidewalk. A group of freshmen parted around him like water hitting a stone. He turned to Sarah, a smirk playing on his lips that didn't quite reach his eyes. Stevens is a brilliant historian, Sarah, but he's scared. He thinks code is poetry. It's not. It's architecture. If a building has rotten wooden beams in the basement, you don't mourn them. You replace them with steel. We are the steel. He turned back to the street, his confidence radiating like heat. They were passing the edge of Kendall Square, the most innovative square mile on the planet. Glass towers reflected the gray sky housing the giants Google, Microsoft, Pfizer. Jason looked at them not with awe, but with the hunger of a predator eyeing territory. He didn't want to work for them, he wanted to buy them. As they rounded the corner toward their favorite coffee haunt, the sleek, futuristic aesthetic of the square was interrupted by an anomaly. It was a stain on the pristine landscape of innovation. A folding table, warped by years of humidity, sat beneath a faded blue canvas umbrella that had seen better decades. Piled high upon it were bricks of paper, books. Not the crisp, glossy textbooks from the campus store, but old books. Books with cracked spines, yellowed pages, and the distinct, musty smell of time. Behind the table sat Arthur. Arthur was a man who seemed to be eroding. His coat was a patchwork of tweed and wool, colors faded into a uniform gray. He wore thick, tortoiseshell glasses that magnified his eyes into owl-like orbs, and his hands, currently resting on a stack of worn paperbacks, were maps of veins and liver spots. He sat perfectly still, watching the frenetic pace of the students rushing by, a lighthouse keeper watching a storm he could not stop. God, Jason sighed, slowing down. Is he still here? I thought campus security was going to sweep the sidewalk this month. He's harmless, Sarah said softly. I bought a copy of Dune from him freshman year. It smelled like vanilla. It smells like dust mites and obsolescence, Jason corrected. Look at him. It's pathetic. He's sitting on prime real estate selling dead trees. A woman, perhaps in her 50s, was standing in front of Arthur's table. She looked flustered. In her hand was a copy of Grimm's fairy tales, bound in red cloth. She was holding a credit card, tapping it aggressively against a small, white plastic square sitting on the table, a cheap, mobile point-of-sale device connected to an ancient smartphone. "It's not beeping," the woman complained, her voice tight with the stress of a busy day. "I'm tapping it. Why isn't it beeping?" Arthur looked up, his expression mild and apologetic. He adjusted his glasses and reached for the device with a trembling hand. I apologize, ma'am. The signal seems to be capricious today. Perhaps if we try the chip?" He took the card, his fingers fumbling. He tried to insert it into the slot, but his angle was wrong. He missed. He tried again. The card slipped from his dry fingers and clattered onto the pavement. "Oh, for heaven's sake," the woman huffed. "Never mind. I'll just order it on Amazon. This is ridiculous." She turned to leave, but Jason was already moving. It wasn't kindness that propelled him forward. It was a compulsive need to correct inefficiency. It was the same impulse that made him rewrite messy code or straighten a crooked painting. To Jason, Arthur's struggle was a bug in the system of the street. "Wait," Jason commanded. His voice had the projection of a lecture hall speaker. The woman paused. Jason stepped up to the table, his shadow falling long and sharp across the books. He didn't look at Arthur. He looked at the device. "The Bluetooth pairing is dropped," Jason said, his tone flat. He picked up Arthur's phone. "A cracked Android model that was at least 6 years old. And you have too many background processes running. This phone has less RAM than my toaster." Arthur looked at Jason, blinking slowly. The RAM. Yes. Has been sluggish." Jason swiped through the phone's interface with lightning speed, his thumbs blurring. "You have geolocation on, brightness maxed, and 12 tabs of browser history open. You're choking the processor." He tapped the screen aggressively. "Repaired. Done." He held the card reader out to the woman. "Tap it now." "Beep." "Approved," Jason said, dropping the device back onto the table with a clatter. The woman looked relieved, thanked Jason profusely, grabbed her book, and hurried away, eager to escape the awkward tension. Jason stood there, wiping his hands on a sanitizing wipe he pulled from his pocket, as if the contact with the old technology had physically soiled him. He looked down at Arthur. The old man was slowly retrieving the credit card reader, placing it back in its designated spot next to a stack of Isaac Asimov novels. "Thank you, young man," Arthur said. His voice was like grinding gravel, rough, deep, and slow. "You move very quickly." "Someone has to," Jason replied, crossing his arms. He looked at the books. The Mythical Man-Month. The C Programming Language, First Edition. Structure and Interpretation of Computer Programs. "Why do you do this, Arthur? Is that your name, Arthur?" "It is." "Why?" Jason gestured vaguely at the table. "You're making what? $10 a day? Maybe 20 on a good day. You're sitting in the cold, fumbling with technology you don't understand, selling information that is available for free in microseconds on any device in a 10-mile radius." Arthur smiled. It wasn't the smile of someone who had been insulted. It was the smile of a parent listening to a toddler explain quantum physics. "I don't sell information, Jason. I sell context. I sell memory." Jason laughed, a short, sharp bark. "Memory is storage space. It's cheap. I can buy a terabyte of memory for $50 at Best Buy." "You're confusing nostalgia with value." Mark and Sarah had caught up, standing slightly behind Jason, watching the exchange with a mixture of amusement and discomfort. "These books?" Jason picked up a copy of a manual on COBOL from the 1980s, the cover torn and taped back together. "Look at this. COBOL. Nobody has written a new line of COBOL in 20 years. This is a fossil. You're selling dinosaur bones to people who are building spaceships." Arthur's eyes drifted to the book in Jason's hand. For a second, a flicker of something sharp, something incredibly alert, passed behind his thick lenses. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. "The spaceship still needs to know where gravity comes from," Arthur said softly. "New languages are built on the logic of the old. If you forget how the foundation was laid, you won't know why the penthouse collapses when the wind blows. The penthouse won't collapse. Jason leaned in, invading the old man's personal space. Because we built it better. We optimized it. We stripped out the junk. He dropped the book back onto the pile. You know, Arthur, there's a metaphor here. You struggling with that card reader. That's the world you live in. A world of friction, of errors, of slow, grinding failure. Jason straightened his coat, checking his reflection in the dark window of a nearby parked car. You should pack it up. Go home. Watch TV. Let the world spin. You're just friction. Arthur didn't get angry. He didn't shout. He simply took a rag from his pocket and began to polish the cover of the book Jason had touched. Friction is the only thing that lets you stop, son, Arthur murmured, almost to himself. Without friction, you just slide until you crash. I don't plan on stopping, Jason said. He turned to his friends. Let's go. I need a triple shot espresso. Dealing with the Stone Age is exhausting. As they walked away, Jason felt a surge of adrenaline. He felt powerful. He had defined the world as he saw it, binary. Ones and zeros. Winners and losers. Future and past. He was the one. Arthur was the zero. That was brutal, Jason. Mark laughed nervously. But you're right. Who even reads that stuff anymore? Exactly, Jason replied, his eyes fixed on the horizon where the dark clouds were beginning to swirl with greater intensity. We are the architects now. Behind them, the wind picked up, howling through the streets of Cambridge. It caught the edge of Arthur's blue umbrella, making it snap and flutter. The old man didn't watch them go. He sat gazing at the sky, smelling the incoming snow, his hand resting protectively on the spine of the COBOL manual. He knew the smell of this wind. It wasn't just a storm. It was a system reset waiting to happen. The first snowflake fell, dissolving instantly on the hot pavement. Then another. Then another. By the time Jason reached the coffee shop, the sky had turned a bruised purple. The automatic doors slid open with a whisper, welcoming him into the warmth, unaware that the cold was following him, and that the friction he so despised was about to become the only thing that. The snow didn't just fall. It erased. By 10 o'clock that night, Cambridge had ceased to look like a city of brick and mortar and had become a ghostly topography of white mounds and gray shadows. The blizzard, which the weather apps had initially dismissed as a moderate squall, had mutated over the Atlantic into a nor'easter of historic violence. It hammered against the architectural brutalism of the MIT campus, stripping away the boundaries between sidewalk and street, river and bank. The wind howled with a resonant frequency that rattled the double-paned thermal glass of the Ray and Maria Stata Center, a sound like a distant, angry choir demanding entry. Inside the high-performance computing cluster, located in the climate-controlled bowels of Building 32, the storm was nothing more than a statistical abstraction on a weather widget. Here, the air was scrubbed, filtered, and chilled to a precise 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The room hummed with the meditative vibration of 300 server racks, a sound that was less a noise and more a pressure in the ears. It was a cathedral of silicon, bathed in the artificial bioluminescence of blue and amber status LEDs. Jason Thorne sat at the center of the war room, a glass-walled command pod suspended slightly above the main server floor. He was the captain of this starship, and tonight was his maiden voyage into legend. Atmospheric pressure is dropping outside, Mark muttered, tapping his foot nervously against the leg of his standing desk. Power grid fluctuations in the greater Boston area are up 40%. Maybe we should postpone? If the main line goes down during the migration. We have 3 redundant diesel generators in the basement. Mark, Jason said without looking up from his monitor. His face was washed in the cool glow of the terminal. And a UPS battery backup that could run a small hospital for a week. The weather is irrelevant. The code is irrelevant to the weather. Stop looking for excuses to be mediocre. Jason took a sip of lukewarm yerba mate. He felt electric. Tonight was the culmination of Project Chimera, a radical overhaul of the university's financial backend. For decades, the school's endowment, grants, payroll, and tuition data had been held together by a patchwork of systems dating back to the grandfathers of computing. Jason had proposed and built a unifying layer, a hyper-efficient, Python-based architecture wrapped in Rust for safety, designed to ingest millions of legacy records and synthesize them into a real-time, cloud-native database. It was bold. It was dangerous. It was exactly the kind of thing that got you hired as a CTO before you turned 25. Professor Stevens is late, Sarah noted, checking her phone. The roads are probably impassable. He'll be here, Jason said. He wouldn't miss the chance to tell me I'm moving too fast one last time. Below the glass pod, near the heavy security doors that led to the outside world, a buzzer sounded. It was a harsh, analog noise that cut through the digital hum. Benny, the night shift security guard, a man whose waistline suggested a love for donuts and whose eyes suggested a love for sleep, shuffled to the door. He peered through the reinforced glass, wiped a circle of condensation away, and swiped his badge. The heavy door groaned open, bringing with it a swirl of snowflakes and a blast of freezing air that danced across the polished floor. Into the sterile sanctum stumbled a figure that looked like a heap of discarded laundry. It was Arthur. The old bookseller was shaking violently, his coat sodden and heavy with half-melted slush. His face was a mask of blue-tinged pale skin, and his glasses were completely fogged over. "Jesus, Arthur," Benny whispered, grabbing the old man by the arm to steady him. "What are you doing out there? It's 5 below zero. The shelter was full," Arthur stammered, his teeth chattering with a sound like dry bones clicking together. "Bus stopped running. I just needed a corner, Benny. Just for a bit." Benny looked up toward the glass command pod where the students were working. He bit his lip. Technically, this was a breach of protocol. The server room was a restricted zone. But looking at Arthur's trembling hands, purple with cold, Benny knew that turning him away was a death sentence. All right, Benny muttered. "Over here. Sit by the intake vents. It's warm there. And keep your head down. If the heavy hitters upstairs see you, I'm toast." Arthur nodded gratefully, limping toward a corner where the heat exhaust from the server racks created a warm microclimate. He collapsed onto a folding chair Benny provided, clutching his mop bucket, his prop, his disguise, like a lifeline. He took off his fogged glasses and began to wipe them on a dry patch of his shirt, his eyes immediately darting not to the warmth, but to the blinking lights of the mainframe towers. Up in the pod, Jason spun his chair around. "Who let the stray in?" "It's just Benny's friend," Sarah said, glancing down. "The book guy, Arthur." "Jason, leave it. It's a blizzard. He probably has nowhere to go." Jason frowned, watching the disheveled figure huddled in the corner. "This is a clean room, Sarah. Contaminants matter. Dust matters." "He's in the corner," Mark argued, finding a rare moment of backbone. "He's not touching anything. Focus on the migration. We are T-minus 30 minutes to the midnight toggle." Jason stared at Arthur for a second longer. The old man looked small, defeated, a relic of a bygone era seeking warmth from the very machines that had made him obsolete. It was almost poetic, Jason thought, the past warming itself on the fire of the future. "Fine." Jason turned back to his screens. "Just tell him not to breathe too loud." The door opened again, and this time Professor Stevens burst in. He looked like he had wrestled a polar bear. His coat was covered in snow, his face red and windburned. He stripped off his scarf, looking frantic. "Stop!" Stevens gasped, breathless. Jason stopped the countdown. Jason didn't flinch. "Good evening, Professor. Nice of you to join us. We are currently running final integrity checks. All systems go." Stevens marched up the metal stairs to the pod, water dripping from his boots. "I was reviewing the kernel logs on my way over before my car slid into a ditch. Jason, the memory allocation in your script is too aggressive. You're assuming the legacy mainframe manages pointers the same way modern SQL does. It doesn't. We simulated this, Professor," Jason said, his voice dripping with condescending patience. "We ran 1,000 virtual instances. The wrapper handles the translation. It treats the old COBOL flat files as raw binary streams and reindexes them on the fly. It's seamless. Simulation is not reality. Stevens slammed his hand on the desk, rattling the monitors. Those flat files aren't just data, Jason. They are structural. In the old IBM architecture, the data and the instruction sets for the banking logic are often interleaved. If your script tries to optimize a sector that it thinks is empty space, it might actually be overwriting the transaction protocols. That's impossible, Jason scoffed. That's spaghetti code. Nobody writes like that. They did in 1975. Stevens yelled. Because they had 64 kilobytes of memory to run a bank. They used every single bit. They hid commands in the white space. The room fell silent. Even the hum of the servers seemed to pause. Jason stood up slowly. He towered over the professor. Professor, I respect your tenure. I respect that you taught me Big O notation in freshman year. But you are looking at this through the lens of fear. You see a fragile antique. I see a resource to be mined. We aren't just copying files. We are liberating them. He pointed to the main wall screen. A digital clock counted down. 15 minutes. The board of directors expects the new system to be live at 12:01 a.m. for the fiscal quarter review, Jason said icily. Are you telling me to call the dean and tell him we aborted because you're afraid of ghosts? Stevens hesitated. The pressure from the administration had been immense. Project Chimera was the flagship initiative for the next decade of funding. To pull the plug now would be professional suicide. Just run the sandbox diagnostic one more time. Stevens pleaded, his voice losing its edge. Please. I ran it 10 minutes ago. Jason lied. He hadn't. He had skipped it to save processing power for the pre-caching. It was clean. Green across the board. Stevens exhaled. Defeated. He slumped into a chair. God help us. Down in the corner, Arthur had stopped shivering. He had put his glasses back on. He wasn't sleeping. He was watching the main screen on the wall, where Jason's terminal output was mirrored. His eyes, magnified by the lenses, were narrowed. He saw the script Jason had queued up. He saw the memory addresses. Arthur leaned forward slightly. His lips moved, soundless syllables forming in the recycled air. 7F. For A. That's the kernel ring. He's pointing the garbage collector at the kernel ring. Arthur gripped the handle of his mop bucket. He wanted to shout. He wanted to say that the memory address 0x7F in this specific mainframe wasn't a buffer. It was the master boot record lock. But who would listen? He was the crazy book guy. The friction. So he sat. And he watched the train accelerate toward the broken bridge. T-minus 10 minutes. Mark announced, his voice cracking. Heart rate is 120, guys. Just saying. Steady, Jason murmured. He began typing the final execution string. His fingers were elegant, precise. He felt a surge of dopamine. This was it. The moment he transcended being a student and became a god. The storm outside battered the building. The lights in the room flickered once. A brownout caused by a fallen line somewhere in the city. The UPS batteries kicked in instantly with a distinct click hum, keeping the servers alive without missing a beat. See, Jason grinned. Unstoppable. T-minus 5 minutes. Initiating handshake with the legacy core, Jason narrated his own actions. Bridge established. Data pipes are open. Throughput potential is infinite. Sarah bit her fingernail. I'm getting a latency warning on the UI thread, Jason. Ignore it. It's just the graphics card catching up to the raw data flow. T-minus 1 minute. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with static and sweat. Professor Stevens covered his face with his hands. Benny, the guard, stopped chewing his gum. Even Arthur, in his corner, stood up slowly, his joints popping. 10 seconds, Jason whispered. See you on the other side. He hovered his finger over the enter key. It wasn't just a key. It was the trigger of a gun aimed at the head of the past. 3, 2, 1. Jason pressed the key. Execute. For a moment, nothing happened. The screen displayed a loading bar. It shot from 0% to 20% in a blink. Look at that speed. Jason cheered, throwing his hands up. 20% in milliseconds. We're going to be done in. The bar hit 33%. Then it stopped. It didn't slow down. It didn't buffer. It froze. Hard. The gentle hum of the servers changed. It deepened. It went from a purr to a growl and then to a whine. The pitch rose higher and higher, the sound of thousands of cooling fans spinning up to maximum RPM simultaneously. "What's that noise?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. "Just thermal management," Jason said, though his smile wavered. "The CPU load is peaking. It's normal." The loading bar turned from green to orange. "Jason," Mark said, staring at his monitor. "The read/write heads on the hard drives. They aren't writing. They're thrashing. I'm seeing I/O operations per second hitting millions. That's not data transfer. That's a loop." "It's not a loop," Jason snapped. "It's indexing." Then the lights in the room changed. The soothing blue LEDs on the server racks, all 300 of them, blinked once and turned solid, angry amber. "Warning," a synthesized voice from the environmental control system spoke. "Temperature rising in Sector 4. Temperature rising in Sector 5. The loading bar turned red. "Abort," Stevens yelled, jumping from his chair. "Kill the process. Jason, kill it." Jason frantically hit Control+C. Control+Z. Escape. Nothing happened. He grabbed the mouse. The cursor was glued to the center of the screen. I can't," Jason stammered. The arrogance drained from his face like water from a broken glass. "The input is locked. It's not accepting interrupts." Suddenly, the main video wall, the massive screen that displayed the pride of MIT, glitched. The modern, sleek interface tore apart, revealing jagged lines of static. And then the text appeared. Not the polite, user-friendly error messages of the 21st century, but the raw, terrifying vomit of a dying machine. Fatal exception 0E at 0028. C00068F8 kernel panic. Virtual memory exhausted. File system corruption detected. Sector 0 to 9999. "It's eating the drive," Mark screamed. "It's overwriting the master file table. It thinks the operating system is data." "Pull the plug," Stevens shouted. "Cut the power." "We can't," Sarah cried, pointing to the battery indicators. "We're on UPS. If we cut the mains, the batteries keep it alive. We'd have to physically rip out the batteries." "There's no time." Stevens looked at the clock. "The automated purge cycle. If the corruption hits the security layer, the system will assume it's a virus and wipe the encryption keys to protect the data. We'll lose the keys to decrypt the backups." "How long?" Jason whispered, his voice tiny. "Minutes," Stevens said. "Maybe less." The room was descending into chaos. Alarms began to wail, a shrill, rhythmic screeching. The heat from the servers was becoming palpable, a physical wave of hot air blasting from the racks. Jason sat frozen, his hands hovering uselessly over his expensive keyboard. He was a pilot in a nosedive, pulling a stick that was no longer connected to the wings. He stared at the screen, at the destruction of his future, paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of his failure. He didn't see the movement in the corner. He didn't see the old man in the wet coat drop his mop bucket with a loud clang. He didn't see Arthur push past Benny, who was too stunned to stop him. Arthur didn't walk with a limp anymore. He moved with a terrifying, focused momentum. He marched up the metal stairs, his heavy boots clanging against the grate. Jason felt a hand on his shoulder. He expected Stevens. He expected security. Instead, he was shoved hard out of his ergonomic chair. He sprawled onto the floor, looking up in shock. Arthur stood before the console. The blue light of the dying screens reflected in his glasses, turning his eyes into pools of electric fire. He didn't look like a bookseller. He looked like a captain returning to the bridge of a ship he had built with his own hands. "Get up," Arthur growled, his voice cutting through the alarms. "And stop crying. You woke the dragon. Now we have to kill it. The transition from order to chaos was not a slide. It was a cliff. The war room, designed to be a sanctuary of high-speed logic and cool blue lighting, had transformed into a pressure cooker of screaming alarms and flashing crimson strobes. The acoustic dampening panels on the walls, meant to hush the hum of cooling fans, now trapped the cacophony, amplifying the shriek of the system alerts until it felt like the air itself was fracturing. Jason Thorne lay on the anti-static floor where he had been shoved, the breath knocked out of him not just by the physical impact, but by the sheer audacity of the universe turning upside down. From his vantage point on the carpet, the room looked like the inside of a sinking submarine. He watched, eyes wide and unblinking, as Arthur, the man he had ridiculed for struggling with a credit card reader, settled into the Aron command chair with the weight and familiarity of a monarch ascending a throne. "Don't touch it," Jason gasped, scrambling to his knees. His voice was shrill, barely audible over the sirens. "You'll brick the hardware. That's a $100,000 terminal." Arthur ignored him completely. The old man didn't even blink. He sat with his back straight, leaning slightly forward, his elbows resting on the desk. The chaotic light of the crashing system washed over his wrinkled face. Red, amber, red again, illuminating the deep lines etched by decades of staring into cathode ray tubes. He didn't look like a janitor anymore. He didn't look like a bookseller. In the strobe light madness, Arthur looked ancient and terrifying. A wizard confronting a demon he had bound in chains long ago. A demon that had finally broken loose. "Professor!" Jason screamed, looking at Stevens. "Get him away. He doesn't know the syntax. It's Rust. It's Python. He thinks it's a typewriter." Professor Stevens was standing by the glass wall, staring at the main readout, which was currently vomiting garbage data at an unreadable speed. He looked at Jason, then at Arthur. A strange expression crossed the professor's face. A mixture of desperate hope and sudden, jarring recognition. "Let him work," Stevens said, his voice hollow. "Are you insane?" Jason tried to lunge forward, but Benny, the security guard, stepped in his path. Benny didn't look happy about it, his face pale and sweaty, but he held his ground, a wall of navy blue uniform. "Sit down, kid," Benny grunted. "You had your turn. You crashed the bus." Arthur's hands hovered over the keyboard. It was a mechanical DOS keyboard, chosen by Jason for its tactile feedback and aesthetic, stripped of labels. Arthur didn't need labels. His fingers found the home row not by sight, but by muscle memory that predated Jason's birth. The screen in front of Arthur was a frozen mosaic of a graphical user interface. Windows were overlapping, dialog boxes were frozen in mid-render, and the mouse cursor was a dead pixel in the center of the screen. The modern world was stuck. Arthur didn't try to click. He didn't try to drag. He knew that the GUI, the graphical user interface, was just a painting on top of the machinery. It was a polite lie told to users to make them feel in control. And right now, the lie had stopped working. "First," Arthur murmured, his voice low and gravelly, barely a whisper yet cutting through the noise in Jason's ears. "We turn off the lights so we can see." Arthur's left pinky hit Control. His left thumb hit Alt. His right index finger struck F1. The reaction was instantaneous. The colorful, frozen mess of the modern interface vanished. The windows, the icons, the frantic error messages in sleek sans serif fonts. All of it was wiped away in a single hertz cycle. The screen went black. Pure, abyssal black. For a heartbeat, Jason thought Arthur had killed the power. "You wiped it. You killed the display driver." Then, a single character appeared in the top left corner. A green cursor, a blinking underscore, pulsed. Once, twice, a heartbeat in the void. To Jason, this was the screen of death. It was the place you went when everything else had failed, the terrifying basement of the operating system where there were no safety rails. To Arthur, it was home. This was the TTY, the teletype. This was where the computer stopped pretending to be a desktop and started being a calculator. "Okay," Arthur whispered. "Let's see who's awake." He began to type. The sound was different from when Jason typed. Jason typed in bursts, a machine gun fire of code. Arthur typed with a rhythm. Clack, 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 clack. It was percussive, deliberate, heavy. He wasn't just pressing keys. He was striking them. Top, B, N, 1 grep Z. Text flooded the screen, monochromatic green scrolling against the black. He's using grep? Sarah whispered from behind the professor. She was clutched. Access denied. Arthur read the output. Of course. You locked the root account behind a biometric key, didn't you? It's a thumbprint scanner, Jason said, pointing to the sensor on the side of the keyboard. You can't get in. Only I can authorize root access. And I'm not giving it to you until you explain what you're doing. We don't have time for your thumb, son, Arthur said. He cracked his knuckles. The system is overheating. If the thermal sensors hit 90 degrees Celsius, the hardware triggers a physical shutdown. We lose the RAM. We lose the decryption keys. We lose everything. Then unlock it, Jason. Stevens shouted. No, Arthur interrupted. The biometrics are part of the OS that's currently having a seizure. Even if he puts his thumb there, the driver won't read it. We have to go under the floorboards. Arthur leaned closer to the screen. The glare of the green text reflected in his glasses. This system, the back end, it's an IBM Z. He's bypassing the operating system entirely, Stevens whispered, awe creeping into his voice. He's talking directly to the silicon. The screen flickered. The green text disappeared. It was replaced by a stark, white prompt. KDB. Kernel debugger. Arthur translated. Now we are inside the brain. Great, Jason scoffed, trying to regain some composure. You're in the debugger. You still can't reindex a corrupted database from a debugger. You need SQL tools. You need the interface. Arthur turned his head slowly. For the first time, he looked Jason directly in the eyes. The look stripped Jason naked. It wasn't anger. It was pity. You think data is a table, Jason. You think it's rows and columns that live in a cloud. Data isn't a table. Data is electricity trapped in a silicon gate. It's a physical thing. It lives at an address. If the front door is jammed, I'll climb in through the window. Arthur turned back to the keyboard. Professor, what was the memory offset for the transaction ledger in the 1978 build? Do you remember? Stevens racked his brain. God, Arthur, that was 40 years ago. It was the standard shifting integer. 0x00400000. Too low, Arthur muttered. They would have moved it to the high memory when they virtualized it. He closed his eyes. He visualized the architecture of the mainframe he had helped design. He didn't see code, he saw a building. He walked through the hallways of his memory. Entrance hall, reception, security, vault. The vault is always at the back. Let's try the offset, Arthur whispered. He typed MD0XC00000000. Memory dump. The screen filled with hexadecimal numbers. Rows and rows of pairs. 00FFA412. Garbage, Arthur hissed. Empty space. The purge cycle is starting, Sarah cried out. She pointed to the wall. A red bar had appeared on the main screen, overlaying the static. Cache purge initiated. 45 seconds. If that timer hits 0, Mark wailed, the volatile memory is wiped. The encryption keys for the backup are in the volatile memory. Quiet, Arthur roared. The volume of his voice shocked them all. The frail old man was gone. I need silence. I am listening to the machine. He stared at the hex dump. He scrolled down page after page of meaningless numbers. He was looking for a pattern. Code wasn't random. It had structure. He was looking for the heartbeat of the database. Come on. He coaxed the machine, his fingers hovering. Talk to me. Tell me where you're hurting. And then he saw it. Amidst the chaos of random data, a string of bytes repeated. D5C5E6D6D9D2. Arthur's brain translated EBCDIC instantly. D5 equals N. C5 equals E. E6 equals W. D6 equals Y. D9 equals O. D2 equals K. New York, Arthur whispered. The header tag for the original Federal Reserve interface. I wrote that tag. I wrote it on a napkin in a diner in Queens. He found it, Stevens gasped. He found the entry point. It's at memory address 0xC004A200, Arthur announced. Jason, your script. Where does it think it's writing? Jason was stunned. I don't know. The compiler handles the allocation. Damn it. Arthur slammed his fist on the desk. You wrote the wrapper. Did you set the pointer to static or dynamic? Dynamic. Jason yelled back, defensive. It's supposed to float. That's the problem. Arthur began typing furiously. The old mainframe relies on static geometry. Your script is floating around looking for a parking spot, and the mainframe thinks it's an invasion. I have to pin the memory down. Arthur's fingers flew. He wasn't using commands anymore. He was writing values directly into memory addresses. He was performing open-heart surgery with a scalpel made of hex codes. MM0XC004A20000X90, memory modify. MM0XC004A20110X90, no operation. What are you doing? Jason asked, creeping closer, drawn in despite his fear. You're writing NOPs? No operation instructions? I'm building a wall, Arthur said through gritted teeth. Sweat dripped from his nose onto the keyboard, but he didn't wipe it. I'm creating a buffer zone of emptiness around the database so your rampant script can't eat it. I'm buying us time. Purge cycle 20 seconds. It's not enough, Arthur muttered. I can't write the buffer fast enough. The script is replicating faster than I can type. He needed a way to execute a block command. He needed to tell the CPU to fill 1,000,000 memory addresses with zeros, instantly. But he was in a primitive debugger. There was no memset command here. I need a loop, Arthur realized. I need to write a loop in assembly. He looked at Jason. Boy, do you know assembly? Jason stared at him. Assembly? No, we learn Python, Java, C++. Arthur cursed under his breath. Useless. High-level abstraction junkies. Wait, Jason's eyes widened. I know the opcodes. We did a module on architecture. EB is jump. B8 is move. Arthur looked at him, a spark of connection flying between them. Good. I'll write the addresses. You call out the opcodes. We write a kill loop directly into the processor cache. That's suicide. Jason breathed. If we mess up one bit, we fry the CPU. It's already dead, kid. Arthur grinned, a wild, reckless grin that showed gold fillings. We're just trying to jumpstart the heart. Sit down. Jason hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then he scrambled into the chair next to Arthur. He pulled the secondary keyboard toward him. Ready? Arthur asked. Ready, Jason said. His hands were shaking, but he placed them on the keys. Purge cycle, 10 seconds. Target address 0xC004B000, Arthur shouted. Instruction, move 0 to accumulator. Opcode B8000000000. Jason typed, screaming the hex values as he slammed them in. Instruction, store accumulator to memory index. Arthur commanded. Opcode 8907. Increment index. Opcode 47. Compare index to end address. Opcode 39D1. Jump if not equal. Opcode 75F8. Purge cycle 3 seconds. Execute, Arthur yelled. They both hit the enter key on their respective keyboards simultaneously. The room held its breath. The red bar on the wall froze at 0:01. For a second, nothing happened. The fans continued to scream. The heat was unbearable. Then, the text on the black screen changed. The chaotic scrolling stopped. The hex dump vanished. A single line of text appeared, blinking calmly at the bottom of the screen. Instruction pointer reset. Awaiting command. The screaming fans began to spin down. The pitch dropped from a whine to a hum, then to a whisper. The amber lights on the server racks flickered and turned a solid, beautiful, deep blue. The red warning on the wall dissolved. The main screen went black, then flashed the university logo. System status? Stevens choked out, clutching his chest. Arthur leaned back in the chair, exhaling a breath that seemed to have been held for 40 years. He pulled a dirty handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his glasses. "The patient is in a coma," Arthur said softly. "But the bleeding has stopped." Jason stared at the screen. He stared at his hands. He looked at the lines of assembly code still visible in the command history. He had just spoken to the machine in its own language, guided by a man he thought couldn't read. We stopped the purge," Jason whispered. "We saved the keys. We saved the hardware," Arthur corrected, putting his glasses back on. He looked tired, infinitely tired. "But the database is still a mess. I just built a wall around it. Now we have to go inside and fix the furniture." He turned to Jason. The animosity was gone, replaced by a stern, professional expectation. "My code froze the corruption, Jason. But I can't untangle your Python script. I don't know the new syntax. I stopped the bleeding, but you have to perform the surgery." Arthur stood up, his knees cracking audibly. He gestured to the main chair. "Sit down, architect," Arthur said. "Open your terminal. I'll navigate the memory map for you. You tell your script to back off, line by line." Jason looked at the chair. Then he looked at Arthur. "I can't do it alone," Jason admitted, his voice small. "I don't understand the structure like you do." "I know." Arthur smiled, and this time it was genuine. "That's why we're going to do it together. Pair programming. 1970 meets 2024. Arthur dragged his folding chair next to the expensive ergonomic throne. He sat down, shoulder to shoulder with the young student. "Open a shell," Arthur commanded, "and bring up that optimized script. Let's see what this chimera really looks like." As Jason opened the terminal, the black screen reflected both their faces. One young and smooth, one old and weathered, superimposed over the blinking green cursor. Outside, the blizzard raged on, burying the world in white. But inside the black box of the server room, the first bridge between the past and the future had just been built. "Ready?" Jason asked, his fingers poised over the keys, a newfound respect steadying his hand. Arthur nodded, staring at the code. "Let's debug the world, kid." The silence that followed the near meltdown of the cooling system was heavy, textured, and profound. It wasn't the empty silence of a vacuum, but the vibrating stillness of a battlefield after the artillery has ceased, leaving only the ringing in the ears and the smell of scorched earth. In the high-performance computing cluster of MIT, the scorched earth smelled of ozone, hot copper, and the distinct, damp wool scent of Arthur's drying coat. Jason Thorne sat in his Herman Miller chair, but he no longer lounged. He sat on the edge, his posture rigid, his hands hovering over the mechanical keyboard that he had reclaimed from the command console. Beside him, on the folding metal chair that Benny the guard had scrounged up, sat Arthur. The visual contrast was stark enough to be a piece of modern art. Jason in his fitted charcoal sweater, radiating the sleek, terrified energy of Silicon Valley. Arthur in his stained flannel and tweed, exuding the heavy, immovable gravity of a mountain. On the screen before them, the cursor blinked. It was the only thing moving in the room. "Open the script," Arthur said. His voice was no longer the gravelly whisper of the sidewalk vendor. It was the flat, precise tone of a lead engineer running a code review. "Show me the logic that tried to eat my database." Jason swallowed hard. His throat felt like it was full of broken glass. He alt-tabbed away from the raw memory dump and opened his crowning achievement. Chimera_migration_v4. PY. The code filled the screen, syntax highlighted in neon blues, pinks, and yellows. It was beautiful, modern Python. It was object-oriented, asynchronous, and heavily abstracted. To Jason, it was poetry. To Arthur, it looked like a foreign dialect. Arthur leaned in, squinting through his smudged glasses. He traced a line of code with a finger that still had ink stains from a 1990s paperback on it. Class Legacy Interface. Object. Arthur read aloud, stumbling slightly over the syntax. And here, def parse underscore record, self, raw underscore data. What is this doing? Where is the file definition? Where are the column positions? It's dynamic, Jason explained, his voice trembling slightly. It detects the delimiters. It reads the stream, looks for the end-of-line characters, and splits the data into a list. It's supposed to be flexible. It adapts to the data size. Arthur let out a sound that was half laugh, half groan. It adapts, he repeated, shaking his head. Jason, the mainframe doesn't have delimiters. There are no commas. There are no new lines. In 1975, a byte cost $5. We didn't waste space on commas. Arthur pointed to the raw hex dump on the adjacent monitor, where the corrupted data lay like a mangled car wreck. Look at that block, Arthur commanded.
C4, C1 e 2 di 9.
That's a name. SR. Probably Dasher or Dasrath. But look immediately after it. 000540C. Your script thinks that's the next name because it saw a null byte and assumed it was a break. But it's not. Then what is it? Jason asked, feeling the cold sweat trickle down his spine again. It's a number, Arthur said. It's a packed decimal. Comp3 format. We stored 2 digits inside every byte to save space. The C at the end? That's not a letter. That's the sign nibble indicating a positive integer. Jason stared at him, horrified. You stored numbers inside half bytes? We used every part of the buffalo, son, Arthur murmured. Your script read a credit score, decided it was a string of text because it didn't understand the compression, and tried to autocorrect it into UTF-8 format. You didn't just move the data, you scrambled the DNA. Professor Stevens, watching from the railing behind them, looked like he was witnessing a seance. Can we reverse it? He asked, his voice hushed. If the script overwrote the binary values with text encoding. It's just a translation error, Arthur said, though his eyes remained locked on the screen, scanning the carnage. The data isn't gone. It's just speaking the wrong language. We need to write a Rosetta Stone. We need to tell Jason's script how to read history. Arthur turned to Jason. Can you modify your parser? Can you tell it to stop looking for patterns and start listening to rules? Jason looked at the keyboard. He looked at his hands. 10 minutes ago, he thought he was the smartest person in the room. Now, he felt like a toddler holding a crayon in an architectural firm. But as he looked at the code, he saw it differently. He saw the arrogance in it, the assumption that the past was simple. Yes, Jason whispered. I can overload the read method. I can force it to read fixed-width bytes if I know the widths. I know the widths, Arthur said. He tapped his temple. I wrote the schema. It's in here. Okay. Jason sat up straighter. He cracked his knuckles. It was a nervous tick, but it signaled readiness. Let's do it. Tell me what to type. Define a map, Arthur ordered. First field, student ID, 9 bytes, numeric, display format. Jason's fingers flew. Offset equals 0 student underscore ID equals raw underscore bytes. Offset. Offset plus 9. Decode. EBCDIC. Offset plus equals 9. Next. Arthur continued, his eyes closed, visualizing the punch cards of his youth. Last name. 20 bytes. Alphanumeric. Padded with spaces. Last underscore name equals raw underscore bytes. Offset. Offset plus 20. Decode. EBCDIC. Strip. Offset plus equals 20. Next. First name. 15 bytes. They fell into a rhythm. It was a strange, syncopated dance. Arthur was the architect, pulling blueprints from the dusty archives of his memory. Jason was the builder, wielding the high-speed power tools of modern syntax to cut and shape the raw binary stream. Stop, Arthur said suddenly. Jason froze. What? The next field. Arthur opened his eyes. He leaned closer to the screen. In the 1982 update, we ran out of space in the student record for the tuition status flag. We didn't want to recompile the whole database. So, Arthur hesitated, a sheepish grin touching his lips. So we hid it. You hid it? Sarah, the UI designer, piped up from the back. Where? In the middle initial field, Arthur confessed. The middle initial is only 1 byte, but we allocated 2. The second byte, the one that looks like padding, that's actually a bit mask. The first bit is paid. The second is scholarship. The third is probation. Jason stared at the old man. You hacked the production database? You embedded logic in the whitespace. It was a patch. Arthur defended himself. It was supposed to be temporary. We called it the phantom byte. And my script. Jason realized, his face paling. Your script saw the empty space and trimmed it. Arthur finished. You stripped the white space. You just expelled every student on probation and revoked every scholarship in the university. Oh my God! Jason buried his face in his hands. Don't panic! Arthur grabbed Jason's shoulder. The grip was firm. The data is still in the backup dump we isolated. We just need to extract it. Write a bitwise operator. Look at the byte at offset 45. Isolate the bits. Jason took a deep breath. He nodded. He began to type again. Middle underscore initial underscore block equals raw bytes. Offset. Offset plus 2. Status underscore flag equals middle underscore initial underscore block. 1. Is for scholarship equals. Status underscore flag and 0B000000010. Yes. Arthur nodded, watching the Python code appear. That's it. You're speaking its language now. For the next hour, time seemed to dissolve. The blizzard outside howled against the glass, burying the world in white silence. But inside the war room, a bridge was being built across time. It wasn't easy. They argued. Why is the year format just 2 digits? Jason demanded at one point. Y2K. Did you learn nothing? It was 1978, kid. Arthur snapped back. We thought we'd be flying cars by 2000. Not fixing banking software. We were saving memory. This is insane. Jason muttered as he wrote a complex handler for signed overpunch characters. Who keeps negative numbers by changing the letter of the last digit? J means -1? K means -2? Why not just use a minus sign? Because a minus sign takes up a whole byte. Arthur roared. We didn't have the byte. But beneath the bickering, a current of mutual respect began to flow. Jason marveled at the sheer ingenuity of the constraints Arthur had worked under. Every bit was sacred. Every cycle of the CPU was accounted for. It was coding as survival. It was lean, mean, and incredibly clever. And Arthur, watching Jason work, began to see the beauty in the bloat. He saw how Jason could manipulate data structures with a single line of code that would have taken Arthur a week to write in assembly. He saw the power of abstraction, the ability to stand on the shoulders of giants and reach the sky. You move fast, Arthur murmured, watching Jason refactor a loop in seconds. You don't have to worry about the registers. The machine does it for you. That's the point, Jason said, his eyes glued to the screen. We abstract so we can build bigger things. Just make sure you don't build them so high you can't see the ground, Arthur cautioned. Finally, the script was done. The legacy _decoder _v1. py. This is it, Jason said. The cursor hovered over the run button. If this works, it reads the corrupted binary dump, applies your schema, extracts the hidden bit masks, decodes the packed decimals, and repopulates the SQL database. And if it fails? Professor Stevens asked from the shadows. Then the data is scrambled forever, Arthur said. Humpty Dumpty stays broken. Jason looked at Arthur. Do you want to push the button? Arthur looked at the mouse. The sleek, ergonomic, wireless mouse. He shook his head. No, you're the pilot, Jason. I'm just the navigator. Fly the plane. Jason nodded. He didn't smash the enter key this time. He pressed it gently with reverence. Running script. The terminal output paused. The fans in the room seemed to hold their breath. Processing Sector 0. Okay. Processing Sector 1. Okay. Lines of text began to scroll. Not the angry red errors of before, nor the gibberish of the crash. Green text. Structured data. Names. Dates. Tuition amounts. Record 1024. Restored. Smith. John. Scholarship. Active. Record 1025. Restored. Doe. Jane status. Paid. It's working, Sarah whispered, tears springing to her eyes. It's actually reading it. The scroll speed increased. Thousands of records flew by. The phantom byte was being recognized. The packed decimals were expanding into proper integers. The two distinct worlds, the iron core logic of 1970 and the fluid dynamics of 2024, were shaking hands. Arthur watched the screen, his face unreadable. He wasn't looking at the data, he was looking at the names. He saw the digital ghosts of people he had processed 40 years ago, and their children and their grandchildren. The system he had built, the system Jason had called a fossil, was alive. It was breathing. Suddenly, the scrolling stopped. Migration complete. 45,203 records processed. 0 errors. System integrity. 100%. The message hung there, glowing in the dim room. Jason slumped back in his chair, exhaling a breath that felt like it had been trapped in his lungs for a lifetime. He felt lightheaded. 0 errors, Jason whispered. We did it. The room erupted. Sarah and Mark were hugging. Professor Stevens was shaking Benny's hand vigorously. It was the relief of survivors walking away from a plane crash. But Jason didn't join the celebration immediately. He turned to look at Arthur. The old man was sitting quietly, rubbing his wrists. The adrenaline was fading, and the exhaustion of his age was crashing down on him. He looked smaller now, his coat too big for his shoulders. You okay? Jason asked softly. Arthur looked up. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. I'm tired, kid. Coding. It's a young man's game. My fingers don't move like they used to. Jason looked at the screen, then back at Arthur. You kept up. You ran laps around me. I just knew where the shortcuts were. Arthur smiled wearily. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his pocket watch. A mechanical one. Naturally. He checked the time. It's almost dawn, Arthur noted. The storm should be breaking. He stood up, groaning slightly as his stiffness caught up with him. He picked up his mop bucket. The absurdity of it, the savior of the university's future picking up a janitorial prop, hit Jason like a physical blow. Where are you going? Jason stood up quickly. Shift's over, Arthur said. And the snowplows will be out. I have to go clear off my book table before the city finds me for obstruction. Arthur, wait. Jason stepped in front of him. You can't just leave. You saved us. You saved me. We need to tell the dean. We need to. Arthur held up a hand. Tell the dean what? That a crazy old man broke into the server room and hacked the mainframe? They'd arrest me, Jason. Or worse, they'd try to hire me. He chuckled dryly. I don't want a desk. I don't want a badge. I just want to sell my books. But Jason struggled for words. The arrogance that had defined him for 4 years was gone, replaced by a confusing, aching sense of debt. I treated you like dirt. I laughed at you. Arthur looked at Jason, his eyes clear and kind. You were compiling, Jason. You were young code, full of bugs, eager to run, crashing into things. That's how you learn. Tonight you debugged yourself a little bit. Arthur patted Jason on the arm. Keep the book, son. The Mythical Man Month. Read the chapter on second systems. It explains why you tried to do too much at once. With that, Arthur turned and walked toward the heavy security doors. Benny opened them, giving the old man a salute that was entirely devoid of irony. Jason stood alone in the center of the war room. The servers hummed their contented, steady song. The blue lights blinked peacefully. The screen displayed the word system ready. For the first time in his life, Jason realized that the system wasn't just the hardware in the room. It was the people who built it, the hands that typed the first commands, the minds that solved the problems before there was a Google to search for the answers. He looked at the empty folding chair where Arthur had sat. Second system effect, Jason whispered to himself, recalling the term from the book he had dismissed, the tendency of small, elegant systems to become overgrown and disastrous in their second iteration due to overconfidence. He sat back down. He didn't close the terminal. Instead, he opened a new file, #credits, txt. He began to type, not code, but a comment, a permanent record that would live in the root directory of the new system, invisible to the users, but visible to anyone who, years from now, might open the hood to see how it worked. The dawn broke over Cambridge not with a whimper, but with a blinding, diamond-hard brilliance. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world sculpted from silence and ice. Inside the war room of Building 32, the air was still recycled, still smelled of ozone and stale coffee, but the frantic, terrifying energy of the night had evaporated. Jason Thorne sat alone. Professor Stevens had left an hour ago to brief the dean, armed with a carefully redacted report that framed the night's events as a calculated stress test, rather than a near-catastrophic meltdown. Sarah and Mark had collapsed on the beanbag chairs in the break room, sleeping the deep, dreamless sleep of the exhausted. Jason stared at the terminal. The Chimera _migration _V4. PY script was closed. The memory dump was cleared. The system was humming along, processing financial transactions with a smoothness that was almost insulting. The fan speed was back to a whisper-quiet 20%. It was as if the chaos had never happened. But Jason knew. The ghost of the machine was still there, lingering in the logic structures of the database. He opened a text editor. The cursor blinked, a steady, rhythmic heartbeat in the void of the white screen. He hesitated, his fingers hovering over the keys. In the world of software development, documentation was usually an afterthought, a chore delegated to interns. But this felt different. This felt like carving a name onto a tombstone or a cornerstone. He typed, #system kernel patch notes. October 24th, 2024 #critical stability update #architect. J. Thorne. He stopped. He looked at the backspace key. He held it down. The letters disappeared one by one, erased from existence. He typed again. #architects. J. Thorne and A. Pendleton. #note. Core logic successfully bridged to legacy mainframe, IBM Z-Series, via direct memory addressing. #special instruction. Do not remove the NOP buffer at address 0xC004A200. It is the load-bearing wall. Jason saved the file as credits. TXT and buried it deep in the root directory, flagged as a system file, invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. It was a digital message in a bottle, thrown into the ocean of the university's future. He stood up, his joints popping. He felt lighter, yet anchored by a gravity he hadn't possessed 24 hours ago. He walked to the window. The campus was a sheet of white. The snowplows were already out, yellow beetles crawling through the drifts, carving paths for the students who would soon wake up, oblivious to how close they had come to losing their scholarships, their grades, their futures. And somewhere out there, in that frozen white expanse, was Arthur. The question gnawed at Jason. Who was he? Stevens had called him Arthur Pendleton. He had mentioned Wall Street. He had mentioned the 1980s. But the man Jason had met, the man who sold dog-eared paperbacks for pocket change, didn't fit the profile of a Wall Street legend. High-frequency trading architects didn't end up pushing mop buckets to stay warm. Jason turned back to the console. He had access to the entire university archive now. The system he had just saved was the gateway to the institution's memory. He opened the search query. Select * from alumni_archive where last surname equals Pendleton and first name equals Arthur. The query returned 0 results. Jason frowned. Strange, he muttered. He tried the faculty database. 0 results. He tried the staff payroll records from 1970 to 1990. A scanned image of an old, yellowing personnel card appeared on the screen. The photo was grainy, black and white, attached with a rusted staple. It showed a young man with a sharp jawline, thick dark hair, and the same intense, piercing eyes behind horn-rimmed glasses. Name Arthur J. Pendleton. Department, Computer Science Laboratory / Lincoln Labs. Title, Junior Research Fellow. Date of hire, September 1968. Date of termination, May 1974. Termination, Jason whispered. He scrolled down. The reason for leaving was listed in a sprawling, handwritten cursive that required Jason to squint. Resigned. Citation: irreconcilable differences regarding the ethical application of automated banking systems. Jason switched tabs. He opened Google Scholar. He searched Arthur Pendleton Computer Science. The results were sparse, buried deep in the bedrock of the internet, scanned PDFs of academic journals from the era of punch cards. But then he found it. An article from a 1973 issue of the Atlantic Tech Review. The Wizard of Wall Street. How a 25-year-old mathematician is teaching money to think. Jason opened the PDF. There was a photo of Arthur, standing in front of a wall-sized mainframe, holding a reel of magnetic tape like a discus thrower. The article described a prodigy who had written the first asynchronous transaction protocol, the code that allowed money to move between banks without a human signing a piece of paper. It called him the architect of the invisible economy. Jason read on, his eyes scanning the pixels voraciously. Mr. Pendleton envisions a future where code eliminates human error. We are building a world of pure logic, he says. A world where the machine is the ultimate arbiter of truth. It is clean. It is fast. It is perfect. Jason shivered. It sounded exactly like him. It was the same arrogance, the same blind faith in the binary. So what happened? He found the answer in a digitized newspaper clipping from the New York Times, dated October 19, 1987. Black Monday, the day the stock market crashed, wiping out billions of dollars in hours. Algorithm blamed for market spiral. The article detailed how a new form of program trading, automated selling triggered by falling prices, had created a feedback loop, driving the market into the ground. The lead architect of the system at the firm responsible? Arthur Pendleton. There was no interview, no quote, just a mention that Pendleton had been dismissed and was facing an SEC inquiry. The inquiry was later dropped for lack of evidence of malice, but the damage was done. The wizard had built a monster, and the monster had eaten the world. Jason sat back, the breath leaving his lungs. Arthur hadn't just written banking logic. He had invented the prototype for the very thing Jason was trying to build, a system so efficient it became dangerous. Arthur had seen the crash coming because he had caused one before. The friction Arthur spoke of. Computers are fast, humans need to be slow. It wasn't a senile rambling. It was a penance. Jason grabbed his coat. He didn't care about the sleep he was missing. He didn't care about the dean's impending congratulatory speech. He grabbed the copy of the Mythical Man-Month that Arthur had given him, the book that was now sitting on the desk like a holy text, and ran for the door. The cold outside was shocking. It hit Jason like a physical slap, instantly freezing the moisture in his nostrils. The sun was blindingly bright, reflecting off the 3 feet of snow that blanketed Massachusetts Avenue. Jason squinted, scanning the street. The spot where Arthur's book table usually stood was empty. Just a mound of snow plowed up against the brick wall of the pharmacy. No table, no books, no blue umbrella. Think, Jason hissed to himself, his breath pluming in the air. Where would he go? Benny had mentioned a shelter being full. Arthur had said he needed to clear his table before the city fined him. That meant he lived close enough to haul books back and forth. Jason walked to the spot where the table used to be. The snow had been disturbed here. Someone had been digging. He looked down the alleyway adjacent to the pharmacy. It was a narrow wind tunnel of a passage usually filled with dumpsters. At the far end, Jason saw a faint set of footprints, dragged, heavy footprints, leading toward a rusted service door behind an old laundromat. Jason followed them. The snow crunched loudly under his designer boots. He reached the door. It was unmarked, peeling gray paint revealing rusted steel beneath. There was no doorbell, just a heavy iron knocker. Jason raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. What was he doing? Was he going to apologize? Offer money? Ask for mentorship? It all felt inadequate. The man had saved his career and vanished into the snow like a superhero in a tweed coat. He knocked. Thud, thud, thud. Silence. He knocked again, louder. Go away. A voice muffled by the door. It wasn't Arthur. It was a woman's voice, sharp and annoyed. No soliciting. We don't want any Jehovah's Witnesses. I'm looking for Arthur. Jason shouted through the steel. Arthur Pendleton. There was a pause. The sound of a chain sliding. The door opened a crack, revealing a suspicious eye and a cloud of cigarette smoke. An elderly woman in a floral housecoat peered out. Who asks? My name is Jason. I'm a student. I have his book. He held up the paperback. The woman eyed the book, then Jason's expensive coat. She seemed to calculate the risk. He ain't here. He's at the diner. The Blue Diner on Main. Always goes there after a storm to get the early bird. Says the coffee tastes like battery acid, but he drinks it anyway. Thank you, Jason gasped. He turned to run. Hey! The woman called out. Jason stopped. He left his cart here, she said, her voice softening slightly. He couldn't push it through the snow. He took the books inside, but he looked. He looked beat, kid. Whatever he did last night, it took a piece out of him. Jason nodded, a lump forming in his throat. I know. I'll bring him back. The Blue Diner was a relic of the 1950s that had somehow survived the gentrification of Cambridge. It was a chrome and neon Airstream trailer permanently parked on a lot that was worth millions. Jason pushed open the door. The bell jingled. The air inside smelled of bacon grease, maple syrup, and wet wool. It was warm, impossibly warm compared to the biting cold outside. The diner was mostly empty, save for a truck driver at the counter and a solitary figure in the back booth. Arthur sat facing the window, watching the snow-covered street. He had a mug of black coffee in front of him, untouched, steam rising in a lazy spiral. He wasn't reading. He was just looking. Jason walked over slowly. He felt like an intruder disturbing a statue. Mind if I sit? Jason asked. Arthur didn't jump. He turned his head slowly, his eyes tired but clear. He saw Jason, saw the exhaustion in the young man's face, the dark circles under his eyes. A faint smile touched his lips. Free country, Arthur rasped. Though the coffee really is terrible. Jason sat. He placed the mythical man-month on the Formica table between them. I found you in the archives, Jason said. He didn't waste time with small talk. The events of the night had stripped away the need for social lubricant. Project Deadless, the Black Monday crash, the Wizard of Wall Street. Arthur stared at the coffee cup. He didn't deny it. He didn't look surprised. You were a ghost story, Jason said. Professors talk about the Pendleton algorithm in theoretical abstract, but nobody knew it was you. Nobody knew you were sitting on the sidewalk selling paperbacks for $3. $2. Arthur corrected gently. $3 for the hardcovers. Why? Jason asked. It was the only word that mattered. You could be running a hedge fund. You could be a department chair. You wrote the foundation of the digital economy. Why are you here? Arthur sighed. He picked up a spoon and stirred the black coffee, watching the vortex form. Because I won, Jason. Jason blinked. What? I won, Arthur repeated. In 1987, I built the perfect system. It was faster than thought. It reacted to market variances in microseconds. It was pure efficiency. And because it was perfect, it broke the world. Arthur looked out the window at the snow. I watched people lose their pensions that day. I watched companies fold. Because my code did exactly what I told it to do. It optimized, found the bottom, and it dragged everyone down there with it. He turned back to Jason. I realized then that code has no conscience. It has no morality. It only has instructions. And if the architect doesn't build in the friction, the hesitation, the doubt, the human slowness, the machine will drive off the cliff every single time. Arthur tapped the cover of the book on the table. I sell books because books are slow, Jason. You have to turn the page. You have to read the sentence. You can't control plus FA feeling. I needed to remind myself that the world isn't data. It's stories. And stories take time. Jason sat in silence, processing this. He thought about his Chimera project. The speed. The zero latency. The arrogance of liberating the data. He had almost done it again. He had almost been the 2024 version of Arthur Pendleton. I put your name in the kernel, Jason said quietly. In the credits. I locked the NOP buffer you wrote. I marked it as a load-bearing wall. Arthur chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. You shouldn't have done that. Someone will just delete it in the next update. Legacy junk, they'll call it. No, Jason said firmly. I won't let them. I'm the lead architect now. Arthur raised an eyebrow. Oh, the dean didn't fire you for breaking into the server room? Stevens covered for us. He called it a live-fire exercise. Arthur laughed, a genuine laugh this time. Stevens always was a good liar. He plays bridge like a shark. Jason reached into his pocket. He pulled out an envelope. He had stopped at an ATM on the way, withdrawing the maximum daily limit. It wasn't much compared to what Arthur was worth, but it was everything Jason had liquid. He slid the envelope across the table. I can't pay you for the code, Jason said. That code is priceless. But I can buy your inventory. Arthur looked at the envelope. He didn't touch it. My inventory. All of it, Jason said. Every book in your apartment. Every manual. Every novel. I want to buy the collection. And what are you going to do with 1,000 musty old books? Kid, you live in a dorm. You don't have shelf space. I'm not going to keep them, Jason said. I'm going to start a library. Permanent one. In the student lounge of the CS building. The Arthur Pendleton Reading Room. No screens allowed. Just paper. Just friction. Arthur stared at Jason. His eyes misted over. He looked away, blinking rapidly, fighting the emotion that threatened to crack his stoic veneer. You're a strange kid, Jason Thorne, Arthur whispered. You crash a mainframe on a Thursday, and you try to build a library on a Friday. I learned from the best, Jason smiled. Arthur reached out. He didn't take the envelope. He took the book, The Mythical Man-Month. He opened it to the inside cover, pulled a cheap ballpoint pen from his pocket, and scribbled something. He slid the book back to Jason. Keep the money, kid. Buy yourself a warmer coat. You look ridiculous in that thing. Arthur stood up, buttoning his threadbare tweed jacket. But if you're serious about the library, come by the apartment on Sunday. Bring boxes. My back can't handle the stairs anymore. Jason looked down at the book. On the inside cover, in shaky but elegant cursive, Arthur had written, to Jason, the first system is for the machine. The second system is for the user. The third system is for the soul. A.P. Arthur dropped a $5 bill on the table for the coffee he hadn't drunk. He tipped his imaginary hat to Jason. See you Sunday, architect. Jason watched him walk out of the diner. The old man moved slowly, carefully navigating the ice, a solitary figure against the blinding white of the snow. He wasn't a wizard anymore. He wasn't a relic. He was just a man who had made peace with his ghosts. Jason picked up the coffee cup Arthur had left. It was still warm. He took a sip, tasted like battery acid. He smiled, opened the book and began to read chapter 1. Really read it, for the first time. The rush was over. The friction had begun. The snow melted, as it always does, retreating from the cobblestones of Cambridge to reveal the sodden, resilient earth beneath. But the winter of 2024 left a mark on the Massachusetts Institute of Technology that no changing season could erase. By the time the cherry blossoms began to foam in pink and white clouds along the Charles River, the Great Glitch, as the students whispered about it, had already faded into the realm of campus mythology, a digital ghost story told to freshmen to scare them into checking their pointers. But for Jason Thorne, the thaw brought not a forgetting, but a crystallization of everything he had learned in the dark, freezing silence of that server room. The Ray and Maria Stata Center was still a monument to deconstructivist chaos, all tilting angles and mirrored surfaces reflecting the spring sun. But inside the Department of Computer Science, a small, quiet revolution had taken root. In the corner of the student lounge, an area previously occupied by vending machines and a neglected foosball table, stood a new structure. It was a glass-walled enclosure, soundproofed and distinct, housing 4 rows of heavy oak bookshelves that smelled of lemon oil and aging paper. Above the door, a modest brass plaque read simply, "The Arthur Pendleton Reading Room. Analog only." Inside, there were no charging ports, no Wi-Fi repeaters, and absolutely no screens. There were only chairs, deep, comfortable leather armchairs that swallowed you whole, and books, thousands of them. Jason stood outside the glass, watching. Inside, a sophomore, a girl with purple hair who was known for her brilliant but erratic neural network models, was curled up in a chair. She wasn't scrolling. She wasn't typing. She was holding a hardcover copy of The Soul of a New Machine, turning the page with a slow, deliberate crinkle that seemed deafeningly loud in the context of a building that usually only hummed with cooling fans. She paused, looked up at the ceiling, thinking, digesting, before lowering her eyes back to the text. It was the friction Arthur had spoken of. The pause. The space between the input and the output where wisdom actually lived. Jason checked his watch. A mechanical Hamilton field watch, a gift he had bought for himself to replace the smartwatch that now sat in a drawer, and realized he was late. It was Sunday. Sunday was for sorting. He walked out of the campus, ignoring the frantic energy of finals week that buzzed around him like a swarm of bees. He walked past the spot on the sidewalk where the blue umbrella used to stand, now occupied by a rack of electric rental scooters, and turned down the alleyway that led to the rusted service door. The routine had become his anchor over the last 5 months. Every Sunday, Jason would bring coffee. Good coffee from a roaster in Somerville, not the battery acid from the Blue Diner. And he and Arthur would spend the afternoon cataloging the remainder of the collection that hadn't fit in the university lounge. But today, the service door was locked. That wasn't right. Arthur usually left it unlatched for him. Jason knocked, the hollow boom of the iron against steel echoing in the narrow alley. He waited. He knocked again. A cold prickle of unease, reminiscent of the panic he felt when the server room lights turned red, began to crawl up his neck. He stepped back and looked up at the second-floor window. The blinds were drawn tight. "He ain't there, kid." Jason spun around. It was Mrs. Higgins, the landlady, standing by the dumpster with a laundry basket propped against her hip. She wasn't smoking today. Her face, usually set in a mask of suspicion, looked soft, crumbled, like a piece of paper that had been balled up and smoothed out again. "Mrs. Higgins," Jason said, his voice tight. "Is he at the diner?" She shook her head slowly, looking down at her fuzzy slippers. "Ambulance came last night, about 3 in the morning. He couldn't breathe. His heart," they said. "It was just tired." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The roar of the city traffic faded into a dull, underwater drone. "Which hospital?" Jason demanded, already reaching for his phone. "Mass General? Mount Auburn?" "He didn't make it to the hospital, Jason," she said softly. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than the snow. It was a silence that deleted the future. Jason stood there, the bag of high-end coffee beans heavy in his hand, staring at the peeling gray paint of the door. He felt a sudden, irrational anger. They had a plan. They were going to finish sorting the science fiction section today. Arthur was going to explain the optimization logic behind the 1982 oscillating sort algorithm he had mentioned last week. He couldn't just leave. The code wasn't finished. "He left something for you," Mrs. Higgins said, breaking the spell. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object wrapped in a brown paper grocery bag. "He told the paramedics, right before they took him down the stairs," he said, "if the tall kid with the expensive coat comes by, give him this. Tell him it's the source code." Jason took the package. Felt cold. He nodded to Mrs. Higgins, unable to speak, and turned away. He didn't go back to the dorm. He didn't go to the library. He walked. He walked until his legs burned, ending up on a bench overlooking the Charles River, where the rowing teams were cutting sleek lines through the water, unaware that the architect of the invisible world that allowed them to buy their boats and pay their tuition had just ceased to exist. He unwrapped the package. Inside was not a hard drive. It was not a notebook. It was a stack of punch cards. They were stiff, rectangular cards made of cream-colored cardstock, perforated with hundreds of tiny rectangular holes. The physical medium of the first digital age. A rubber band held them together. On the top card, written in Arthur's shaky hand, was a date. November 1968. Jason ran his thumb over the holes. He closed his eyes. He could almost hear Arthur's voice, gravelly and amused. Data isn't a cloud, Jason. It's a thing. It has weight. Under the stack of cards was a letter. It was written on the back of a scary-looking notice from the electric company. Jason, if you are reading this, then my loop has finally hit a termination condition. Don't debug it. It was a feature, not a glitch. We all have a runtime limit. These cards are the first program I ever wrote that actually worked. It wasn't banking logic. It wasn't a stock market predictor. It was a program to generate music. A simple sine wave algorithm to play Bach's Cello Suite No. I wrote it because I wanted to see if a machine could make something beautiful. Couldn't. The math was perfect, the pitch was exact, but it had no soul. It was just noise. I spent the next 40 years trying to optimize the world, trying to make it run like that program, perfect, fast, and efficient. I forgot that the beauty of the cello suite isn't in the notes. It's in the way the cellist's hand trembles on the bow. It's in the friction. You are the best coder I have ever met, Jason. You speak to the machine faster than I ever could. But promise me one thing. Don't just build faster engines. Build better brakes. Build systems that allow people to be human. Don't optimize the soul out of the world. The library is yours now. Keep the books safe. And for God's sake, fix the sorting algorithm in the philosophy section. You put Nietzsche next to Mr. Rogers and they are arguing. End of line. Arthur. Jason sat on the bench for a long time, the sun moving across the sky, watching the shadows of the cherry blossom trees lengthen until they touched the water. He cried, quietly and without shame, the tears tracking down his face and landing on the punch cards, a chaotic, analog input that no computer could ever process. Graduation day arrived 2 weeks later, bathed in the kind of aggressive, high-definition sunlight that university brochures promised. Killian Court was a sea of black robes and mortarboards, rippling in the breeze like a vast, dark data set. Parents beamed, cameras flashed, and the air buzzed with the collective anxiety and triumph of 5,000 students preparing to launch themselves into the economy. Jason Thorne, valedictorian of the School of Computing, sat on the stage. He wore the robe, the heavy velvet hood, and the gold cords, but he felt like an imposter. The speech he had submitted for approval 3 weeks ago was sitting on the podium. He knew it by heart. It was a good speech. It talked about disrupting industries, scaling solutions, and architecting the future. It was full of the buzzwords that the donors and the dean wanted to hear. It was a speech Jason Thorne, the arrogant prodigy of Chapter 1, would have delivered with a smirk. But that Jason Thorne was dead. He had died in a server room on a snowy night, killed by a buffer overflow and resurrected by a man with a mop. The dean approached the microphone, his voice booming across the lawn. And now, to deliver the student address, a young man who spearheaded the Chimera integration, securing the university's financial infrastructure for the next century. Mr. Jason Thorne. Applause washed over him, a wave of polite noise. Jason stood up. He walked to the podium. He gripped the wood, feeling the grain under his fingers. He looked out at the sea of faces, his classmates, the golden kernels, the future CEOs, the inventors of AI, the masters of the metaverse. They looked hungry. They looked fast. Jason looked down at his prepared speech. The pages were crisp, typed in 12-point Times New Roman, double-spaced. He reached into the pocket of his robe and pulled out a single battered punch card. He folded the speech in half, then in half again, and tucked it into his pocket. He placed the punch card on the podium. "I had a speech written about the future," Jason began. His voice was steady, amplified by the speakers, echoing off the limestone pillars of the Great Dome. It was about how we are going to change the world, how we are going to make everything faster, smarter, and more efficient. It was a speech about how we are the gods of the new age. He paused. The audience shifted. This wasn't the standard opening. "But I don't want to talk about the future today. I want to talk about the past. I want to talk about a man named Arthur." A ripple of confusion went through the faculty section. Professor Stevens, sitting in the second row, took off his glasses and smiled. A sad, knowing smile. "Arthur didn't have a LinkedIn profile," Jason continued. "He didn't have a startup. He didn't have a TED Talk. For the last 10 years of his life, he sold used books on a folding table on Mass Avenue. Most of you probably walked past him. Some of you probably laughed at him. I know I did." Jason gripped the podium tighter. "But Arthur was the reason your financial aid cleared this semester. He was the reason the banking system didn't collapse in 1978. He was one of the first people to teach sand how to think. He built the foundation that we are all standing on today, dancing and celebrating as if we built the floor ourselves." The crowd was silent now. The silence of the reading room. "We are taught here that latency is the enemy," Jason said, his voice rising with emotion. "We are taught that friction is failure. We want instant loading, instant answers, instant gratification. But I learned this winter that a system without friction is a system without control. A car with an infinite engine and no brakes isn't a vehicle. It's a bomb." He picked up the punch card and held it up to the light. The sun shone through the rectangular holes. "This is a punch card. It holds 80 bytes of data. 80 characters. That's less than a single tweet. But 40 years ago, men like Arthur used these cards to send people to the moon. They treated every byte like it was made of gold because they had to. They respected the constraints. They understood the weight of what they were building." Jason looked directly at the camera that was live-streaming the event to the world. "We are entering an age of infinite memory and infinite processing power. AI is writing our code. Algorithms are deciding our news. It has never been easier to create. But it has also never been easier to destroy. If we don't remember the roots, if we don't respect the history of the zeros and ones, we will build a tower so high that it topples over the moment the wind blows." He lowered the card. "Arthur Pendleton passed away 2 weeks ago. He died alone in a walk-up apartment full of books. He left no fortune. But he left a command line in the kernel of this university's mainframe. A patch that keeps the whole thing from crashing. He called it the second system effect, the danger of arrogance. He saved us from ourselves." Jason took a deep breath, his eyes finding the empty space in the sky where the blue umbrella should have been. "So, my challenge to you, the class of 2024, is not to move fast and break things. That's easy. My challenge to you is to slow down. Read the documentation. Understand the legacy. And when you write your code, write it with the knowledge that someday, 40 years from now, some arrogant kid is going to look at it and call it a fossil. Make sure it's a fossil that supports the weight of the future. Make sure it has a soul." Jason stepped back. For a second, there was no sound. Then Professor Stevens stood up and began to clap. Then Sarah. Then Mark. Then the purple-haired girl from the reading room. And then the roar began. It wasn't the polite applause of earlier. It was a thunderous, grounding sound. A standing ovation not for the valedictorian, but for the ghost in the machine. That evening, after the parties had started and the champagne was flowing in the dorms, Jason found himself back in the basement of Building 32. The server room was quiet. The lights were a calm, steady blue. The Chimera system was idling, processing the background tasks of the university with ruthless efficiency. Jason sat in the errand chair. He pulled the keyboard toward him. He logged in. "Welcome, administrator." He navigated to the root directory. He opened the file he had created that snowy morning. Credits. TXT. He stared at the cursor. He thought about the punch cards. He thought about the cello suite. He thought about the mop bucket. He began to type. He added a new section to the file, a final patch note that would persist as long as the silicon held its charge. COBOL. Asterisk Memorial Patch V. Final asterisk in memory of Arthur Pendleton, 1943 to 2024. Asterisk the architect of zeros and ones. Asterisk asterisk if. User underscore dio. System f. Asterisk then asterisk display. Go read a book. Asterisk stop run. Asterisk endif. Jason smiled. He saved the file. He committed the changes. He stood up, pushed the chair in, and grabbed his coat. He walked to the door, but paused at the threshold. He looked back at the towering black monoliths of the servers, the blinking lights that represented billions of dollars and millions of lives. "Good night, Arthur," he whispered into the hum. The servers didn't answer. They just kept running, steady and true, held together by the invisible, unbreakable code of a man who knew that the most important command in any language was the one that told the machine to wait for the human. Jason turned off the lights in the war room, leaving only the blue glow of the machines, and walked out into the warm, fragrant night, ready to build something slow.